I'll do a survey. Just do it. Yes. Greetings of the day, everyone. I'm privileged to welcome you all into the third edition of Orange City Literature Festival, organized by SGL Knowledge Foundation in association with GH Rising University, powered by Rising Group of Institutions, a platform where we celebrate narratives, experiences, and notions from all walks of life. Having said that, it's thrilling to be here with you all. I'm delighted to be anchor for a session on Hitler and India. Was Hitler really a friend of India? Where we have Mr. Vaibhav Purandare sir and Mr. Tushar Mule sir will be in conversation with him. Vaibhav Purandare sir grew up in Mumbai in the 1980s and 90s, a tumultuous decade in which Bal Thackeray and his Shiv Sena went from being regional political players to champions of a militant Hindu that carried their rage across India. He began his journalistic career with the political news magazine Blitz in 1993, in the early part of which Thackeray and his Mumbai riots. Thackeray and his organization played a key role in the Mumbai riots and has since worked with India's leading newspaper such as the Indian Express, the Asian Age, Daily News, DNA, Midway, and Mumbai Mirror. Apart from which, writing for a host of other publications. He has authored 4 books. His latest book, Hitler and India, the untold story of which, Hatred for the Country and Its People, published by West End Books, came out this year. His other best-selling books are Savarkar, The True Story of the Father of Hindutva, Sachin Tendulkar, A Definitive Biography, and Bal Thackeray and the Rise of the Shiv Sena. He is currently senior editor with the Times of India and has worked with the Hindustan Times, the Indian Express, and several other publications. In the past, it's an honor to have you with us, sir. And it is even more delightful as we have Mr. Tushar Mole sir, who will be in conversation with him. Tushar sir is an associate trainer at the Dale Greenwich, India. Sir has 28 years experience in the field of training and development for corporates and academics. dealing with leaders, managers, faculty members, students, and CBSE teachers. Sir is co-authoring a book on employability skills for promising professionals. He constantly works for the betterment of students and motivation and skill development training for the students. Sir is an ardent follower of Indian history and loves to write Hindi poems and history satires. He did several moderations at the teachers' debate competition, panel discussions with industry experts. I once again welcome you, sir, and welcome you, Tushar, sir. Also, before moving ahead, I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the support of Westland as their association is invaluable to OCLA. Now, my dear audience, you are about to experience a conversation between two extremely prolific personalities. So, without taking any more moment, I humbly invite Mr. Tushar Mule sir to lead us ahead. Sir, please.
Welcome, viewers, and welcome, Mr. Vaibhav.
Thank you, Tushar.
And thank you so much for our introduction, detailed introduction. But I'd like to request you the only part, the capacity with which I am sitting here, that I am an ardent follower of Indian history. And probably that's the capacity with which I am sitting here. And I would be asking questions to Mr. Vaibhav on your behalf as a very curious student of history. So, welcome you all for this third Orange City Literature Festival. And this particular literature festival, we have focused on lots of young, enterprising research scholars, those who are really doing a lot of hard work. As we go into the interview, we'll realize what kind of hard work and what kind of work it goes behind bringing a book which may look slim but is heavily loaded with the contents. So when I was going through your entire profile, I had seen one very interesting thing. The kind of subjects you choose. Like on one hand, you are writing about Savarkar, on the other hand, you are talking about Saraswati Thakre, then Sachin Tendulkar, and now a very different thing, like Hitler and India. So my question is, how do you choose the subject for your projects whenever you start?
Thank you, Tushar, for the kind introduction. It's an interesting question you asked. How does one choose a subject? One thing that I always ask myself is we often find subjects which we find extremely interesting. But I ask myself a series of questions before starting work on a project. The first question is okay, the subject fascinates me now. But 1 year down the line, 2 years down the line, will I have the same interest in that subject or will I start losing that interest? The reason I ask myself that question is that book writing does not get over in a year or sometimes even in 2 years. This book, Hitler in India, took me 10 years to research and write. So if your interest starts flagging, then are you going to complete your project? That's the question you need to ask yourself. The second question that I often ask myself is what is the material already available on this subject? And am I contributing something to that material? To the existing material? Am I contributing some new information? Am I contributing a perspective that is new? Or am I looking at the subject in such a way that I'm going to write it in such a manner that it will be compelling for the reader? So these are certain questions you ask yourself. And you take into account the sources available also. Where are your sources? How quickly or easily you can get hold of those sources? How much time do you have on hand? And all of that.
And I'm sure that what kind of questions you ask yourself before deciding a subject, after going through every title, and to be very honest, after going through some part of this particular book, I'm sure that it is not only keeping your interest alive, but probably it is keeping the reader's interest alive. That's something a very humble submission I can give after going through the experts of the book.
Thank you.
Now, when we come to your latest work, now this is about Hitler, this is about India, this is about his hatred towards the country and its people. If we see this entire thing, probably for many years, many decades, nobody had thought of this kind of a topic. Nobody has thought of, as you said, perspective. So this perspective change is likely to come out of this. So what prompted you to write this particular book on this particular topic? There must be some trigger.
Yeah, there was a trigger about 10, 12 years ago. I was reading Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf. All of us had that book at home. Hitler's autobiography is one of the perennial bestsellers in India. You go to a prominent bookshop, it's there, prominently displayed. You go to a roadside bookstore, it's there. You go to a railway bookstore, it's there. It's present across the country, and I'm 100% sure that most of us would be having it in our homes or would have picked it up at some point in time. So when I was reading the book, I suddenly came across this passage about India that Hitler writes about. And I was taken aback when I read that passage. Because we've always had all kinds of assumptions about Hitler in India. We have two principal assumptions. One, in fact, one assumption, largely a result of two factors. The assumption is that Hitler was a friend of India's freedom struggle. And that assumption we've held for a very long time for two reasons. One is Hitler fought the Second World War against the British and the Allied forces. So he was against the British who were ruling us at that point in time, and therefore he was a friend of India. That's the conclusion most of us have drawn. Okay. We have also drawn this conclusion because of the famous photograph that is embedded in Indian memory of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose shaking hands with Hitler during the Second World War when Netaji had gone to Germany to solicit Nazi Germany's help for India's freedom struggle. So, because Bose went to Germany, shook hands with Hitler, had a meeting with Hitler, we also assumed that Hitler was a friend of the Indian people, that he thought well about us. And when I read that passage in Mein Kampf, I was startled because it was full of abuse for the Indian people. It was full of hatred and contempt for India's freedom struggle. It was completely in favor of the British Raj. Hitler was ridiculing India's freedom struggle and making it very clear that the British had every right to rule this country and Indians had no business ruling themselves. And that he thought that Indians were racially unfit people. He did not even count Indians as human. We were subhumans for Hitler and the Nazis. And the Nazi newspaper, Volkische Beobachter, in one of its issues calls Indians bastards and mongrels. Okay? This is in the 1930s when Hitler is in power. But Hitler is writing about Indians much before he comes to power. Soon after he's imprisoned and sent to Landsberg jail, he starts writing his autobiography, and in the second volume of his autobiography, he tackles the subject of foreign policy and the kind of foreign policy a Germany ruled by the Nazis will have. And that is where he talks about India in relation to the British Empire and talks about the desirability of having the white man's rule over all of the earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
But why-
So I was taken aback and I asked myself this question: oh, is there more to it? Is there, first of all, this is surprising in itself, but is there much more to it than I am seeing? And then I looked at the German archives, the Nazi party's archives, details of Nazi party meetings held as early as 1919, soon after the Second World War ended, and Hitler had just joined that party.
I think you're talking about first one.
The First World War, yeah, First World War ended. And Hitler had just joined the party, and minutes of his speeches, which he would give in the beer halls in Munich and elsewhere. And again, I was surprised because I realized that Hitler was talking about India and the British Raj right from his earliest days as a struggling political agitator in Munich. And he continues talking about India right through the 1920s in Mein Kampf, which he writes between 1924 and 1926. Then also in the years leading up to the Nazis gaining power in Berlin, in Germany, and then right through the Third Reich's years in power, and even during the war. So all of this came as a surprise that Hitler starts talking about India in 1919. He makes comments about India, the Indian people, Indian culture, Indian civilization, the Indian national freedom movement, right through his controversial political and military career, almost until the time he commits suicide in a bunker in Berlin. So that was surprising in itself, and I thought that this was a completely forgotten chapter of Indian history. We do write about Post and Hitler, but we seem to have completely forgotten this chapter where Hitler spoke about India over and over again. Because all of us would assume that India would have hardly figured on Hitler's political consciousness. But no, the truth is that it was very much a part of his political consciousness and he was constantly talking about it. He even talks about it at the height of the Second World War. When he's discussing a lot of military maneuvers and other steps to be taken. So all of it came as a surprise, and I thought that this forgotten chapter of Indian history needs to be recorded, and it is important for us in the present generation to be aware of what was going on at that point in time.
When it comes to the West, Hitler is considered to be a gory monster. But when it comes to India, probably people are either they have normalized or they're in love with it. Let me put it like this: the portion of democratic India is flirting with the dictatorship of Hitler. What would you like to say of this?
I have one thing to say about it is that our assumption that Hitler might have been a decent guy, or an assumption that many Indians have, I won't say our, because each one of us does not have an assumption, is rather naive. And contrary to what many intellectual theorists have been saying, it is not on account of the fact that we love dictatorship. It is because one is we have altogether developed some kind of loss of memory about what happened during the 1930s and 1940s. Because if you look at my book, you'll be surprised at the kind of perceptions that Indians have about Hitler. It's totally negative at that point in time. In fact, there are people right from Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose warning Indians about Hitler. And and unknown people writing letters to the editors of prominent Indian newspapers during that period, telling the Indian national readers, beware of this man, do not try and get close to him because he hates Indians. This is what is written in Mein Kampf. Please keep this in mind. And his quotes from Mein Kampf figure again and again in Indian newspapers of that period.
Mein Kampf is there in this.
So to fully answer your question, we are rather naive. First of all, we haven't experienced dictatorship in the real sense. We did have a brief period of dictatorship between 1975 and 1977. And we know when we look at the democratic setup that it's a very messy setup, it's a slow setup. And we often feel that the dictatorship might help us. Because when we look at China, when we look at other countries, we feel that we can get things done quickly. But that is because we have not experienced the negative consequences of absolute dictatorship the way some other countries have. And I think it's a naive assumption that we have. It does not mean that we are in love with dictators or that we are just frustrated often with our democratic systems. And I think it's more an outcome of that than a liking for dictatorship.
Why did I ask you that question? Because most of the time when we come across the system and we fail to deal with it, most of the time people do talk that India needs a dictator. It's something which is said in a very casual parlance.
Yes, absolutely.
They do talk.
Yes, but that's because we haven't experienced. We don't know what it means to have a dictator.
Absolutely.
We don't know what it means to be thrown into jails, left, right, and center, or tortured, or attacked all the time, or being surveilled by the state all the time.
So if I say it's popularity, so let me change my statement. Let me say popularity. If I keep sale of Minecraft and availability of Minecraft in so many stores with the names or without being there, why people do not understand what you understood after reading that particular book? Because Minecraft has mentioned it right from 1926. People have been reading. It is highly salient.
It's a good question you asked, Tushar, because I also wondered why people haven't come across that passage. In fact, after I finished reading Mein Kampf, I asked a number of my friends that same question. And they said they hadn't come across that passage at all. The truth is, the book is so dull and boring that most of us have it, but we haven't read it fully. And it's totally outdated today in the sense that Hitler is writing about very obscure things now, as in what things that appear now to be very obscure. And unless you understand the context in which he's talking, all of that is Greek and Latin to us now. You read a few pages of Mein Kampf and you won't know what's going on because the context is not clear at all. So what we need is a clearly edited, properly annotated edition of Mein Kampf, a critical edition that will tell us about the specific context in which he is speaking. And almost every page needs the context setting that needs to be done in the present, which is not done at all when we read. So most of us have not come to the point where Hitler talks about India. It's not as if we know that we are still saying he was a good man. We don't know. That's the surprising part. And I won't blame the reader because I found it very difficult to go through the book myself. But I was just trying to plodding through the book, and somehow got to the point where he talks about India. Most of us wouldn't have got to that point.
Okay. It means that atrocities are still continuing even if Hitler is in the grave now. When you go through the book, it seems.
Yeah, it's quite a painful read actually.
Okay. In fact, you have mentioned earlier in your book, like Hitler is a very unreliable narrator. That's what historians and researchers like you are acknowledging it now. Was it something kind of this book was written, or maybe some other things other than the book? Was it something like a propaganda machine run by Hitler to create a cult of Hitler?
So Hitler was writing after the Nazi push, in Munich, and he was imprisoned. So he was basically setting out his political testament. That was his political statement that he was making,
Okay.
and he was writing principally for the German population and for Germans scattered in other parts of the world, in Austria and elsewhere. So it was a political statement, and he writes about all kinds of subjects. Of course, he lies about his own childhood, his own youth. Then he talks about the Nazi Party. He talks about how Germans are contracting sexual diseases because they are having sexual intercourse with the Jewish population and others, and all kinds of strange things that he writes about. And in the second volume, he gets into the foreign policy bit, which is where India comes in.
Right. So I just want you to elaborate more because still I am on a point where people there is a popularity here. How do they connect with Hitler? Because we don't have any borders meeting anywhere. We don't have common borders as such. But why? What is there which people feel that probably he is, because there's some Aryan theory you have talked about. So we like to highlight something because right from emblem to Aryan theory to everything. So that's the way people get attracted towards it. They try to connect.
Yeah, Tushar. So, like I said, there are two factors, right? Like I said right at the beginning. One is his fight against the British, which makes us assume he was pro-India. His meeting with Netaji, which makes us assume that he was trying to help India in its freedom struggle. And the third is the Aryan theory that you mentioned. Now, because the Nazis adopted the Aryan theory, and because the word Aryan is a Sanskrit word that comes from India, and the swastika comes from Tibet and from India. And indeed, the swastika is a sacred symbol across the world in various parts of the world. We assume that he took up the Aryan theory, so he must have been an admirer of India, of Sanskrit texts, of the Upanishads, and of our Indian philosophy. But the opposite is true, because the Nazis had twisted the Aryan theory. According to the theory of Aryanism, which is put out by Nazi racial theorists and principally an Englishman, Houston Chamberlain, he was so much in love with the Germans that he renounced his British citizenship and took up German citizenship. So he's the author of he and Arthur Gobineau, a Frenchman, these are the authors of the racial theory of Aryanism. And according to that theory, some 1,500 years ago, the Aryans left Europe, Germany, and other parts of Europe, came to the east, came to India, settled down in India, and reached the height of philosophical thinking in India and produced the Upanishads and other splendid philosophical texts. Now, when they were here, when they were in India and in Tibet, they were careful about one thing. They kept a distance from the local population. The indigenous population, that is us Indians, the native Indians, were these dark people, and the Aryans came here and they formed what is known as the Varna system, the system of caste. And these racial theorists make it very clear that Varna itself is an indicator of the Aryan race theory, because Varna also means color, right? We all know that the word means color. So color is a principal element in that. And they kept a safe distance from the local population. That is why they could reach these heights of metaphysical thinking and philosophical thought and all of that. Unfortunately, according to the racial theorists, after several years, these Aryans from Europe, these handsome people who are, white people, Nordic people who had come on their white horses, they started interacting with the local population and they got bastardized and they started mixing with the local population. The result was that their own Aryanness got corrupted, their own blood got corrupted, and soon they lost all the qualities that distinguished them from these indigenous Indian people. So the Aryans who came here, they became un-Aryan because they mixed with the local Indian population. And that civilization, Aryan civilization, was destroyed here. So let us be very clear about one thing. We Indians are not Aryans in Hitler's imagination. Okay. In Hitler's imagination, Indians are the brown people who are subhuman, who are not human beings, and from whom the Aryan should have kept a distance. But they didn't, and unfortunately, they lost their Aryanness. So the word Arya is from India, from Sanskrit. But Aryans are not Indians. We are not Aryans. We are un-Aryans. No, so we have mixed up these two things. We think that because of the word Aryan and because of the Aryan race theory, Hitler thinks that we are Aryans. No.
And then what about the emblem? His military.
So again, he takes it from this land, from Tibet. But again, the assumption seems to be that this emblem, whether it's the Sanskrit language, whether it's the Upanishads, it's the Nordics who have created and taken up these things and created these symbols. It's not a product of Indian thinking at all. It's a product of Aryan thinking, Nordic thinking. So Hitler doesn't see the swastika as an Indian symbol.
What does he think then?
He thinks it's an Aryan symbol, which is why he's taking it up for his party.
So he means to say that it was somewhere in Europe, into India.
Absolutely.
We think that it has gone back.
Yes, certain things were in Europe, then they came here. certain things they created here because they were serious and deep thinkers.
So, in fact, one more thing I would like to know from you. I want more elaborative response on Hitler's views, because they were very scathing views. Hitler's views not only on India, Indians, but also Indian freedom struggle. And then I'll come to the leadership of India during that period and their relations with India, or their contacts or connects to India. But first thing is I'd like to know about his views, remarks about India, Indians, and Indian freedom struggle.
So Hitler was of the opinion that the white man should rule the earth. He had a very clear idea in his mind that the world should be divided between three kinds of people. The first is the Germans, the Nordic race. They should rule over Eastern Europe and Russia. The British, who were ruling India, he was extremely proud of because the white man had conquered the subcontinent, and he said from time to time, even during the war years, that he's proud of the British Raj in India because it is just a small number of white people who conquered such a significant population and has been controlling this Indian population for a long time. And he held up the British Raj as an example for Nazi Germany to emulate. So they had this jewel in the crown, India, and they should keep India and have those eastern parts of the world. And the United States of America, again, who were white rulers, they should take care of that part of the world. So he said the world should be neatly divided between Nazi Germany, the British who were ruling India, and the Americans. Okay, so the white man's rule on earth. And he wanted Germany to emulate the British to such an extent that he said Russia should be Germany's India. That means the way the British are ruling over India, Nazi Germany should rule over Russia. So you completely subjugate the population, deprive them of all their rights, torture them, send them to prison, loot all their resources, take away all their belongings, make them work as slave laborers, and build palaces just like the British had built in India for their governors all over India. Germany should build for its officials in Russia when it conquers Russia. So he's saying, follow this example. The British are our heroes. Follow their example. But he's saying they also made some mistakes. Let us not make those mistakes in Russia. And what are the mistakes according to Hitler that the British have made in India? One is they gave education to the Indian population. They taught them English. They gave them education. Let us not make that mistake in Germany. The British were stupid. Why are you educating the local Indians? They don't deserve it. We should not. You made them aware of various laws, of some of their own rights. Why are you doing that? Don't do that. You should just make them work and kill them. So this is what he is actually thinking and saying it in so many words. When he writes in Mein Kampf about the Indian freedom struggle, what he says is he wants India to be under the British Raj. He says, nobody will be more upset than me if the British lose the jewel in the crown. When he talks about the League of Oppressed Nations that various countries were trying to form at that point in time, he says it's a coalition of cripples. And he calls Indian freedom strugglers as pretentious Asiatics and fakirs, and in a very derogatory manner. He says these people are going all over the world, saying we want your help for our freedom struggle. But racially, they do not deserve freedom. So the Nazi party should not encourage these Indians when they come to Germany and seek our help in the freedom struggle. I will tell you an interesting thing that happens in the year 1930, which is a chapter in my book. Now, there are two factions in the Nazi party. When the party is growing and just before it comes to power in 1933, there are two factions. One is headed by Adolf Hitler and the other is headed by Gregor Strasser. He is a popular Nazi leader from the northern parts of Germany. And he believes that the Nazis should side with the Indians and other people who have been colonized by other powers and should cooperate with them in their freedom struggle. Hitler has the opposite point of view. Hitler says, no, we have to be with the British. We have to support the British and we have no business supporting the Indians, the Egyptians, or the others who are trying to fight for their political liberation. And tensions in those two factions come to a point where in the year 1930, Gregor Strasser and his brother Otto Strasser, they bring out a lot of Nazi newspapers. They are responsible for running Nazi newspapers. And in one of the Nazi newspapers, there is published an article which is in favor of the Indian freedom struggle. And Hitler calls Strasser's younger brother, Otto Strasser, to meet him. And he says, I want to meet you. And the trigger is this piece, which has appeared in favor of the Indian national freedom struggle. And he says, what have you written in this paper? You're praising Mahatma Gandhi, you're praising the Indian freedom struggle. These are the inferior Hindus. Why do you want to support these people? They don't, they are, and he consistently keeps calling Indians, Hindus, inferior in his writings, in his speeches. And there is a big argument that happens. In fact, there is a 7-hour long discussion that happens between those two people over various topics, over capitalism, socialism, and one of the topics is the right of the colonized people to free themselves. And Otto Strasser says, no, we have to support the Indians. And Hitler says, no, why are you speaking up for the inferior Hindus? They don't deserve freedom. And the meeting heads on this very bitter note, after which the Strasser faction is gradually sidelined in the Nazi party. Hitler comes to power in 1933. Gregor Strasser is a very popular Nazi leader still. In 1934, he gets a knock on his door and SS soldiers come in and he gets a bullet in his head and he's killed. He's one of Hitler's closest colleagues and a very keen follower of Hitler. And he has believed all his life that Hitler is the right man for Germany, who will lead Germany. So he was not really competing with Hitler for leadership of the party. But Hitler shot him dead in 1934. Otto Strasser, the man with whom he had argued for 7 hours in a hotel in Berlin on the Indian freedom struggle, among various other things, he has to leave Germany because he's harassed by the Nazis. And he comes back to Germany only after the Second World War, when Hitler's dead. So these are just two examples. There are a number of such examples. In the year 1936, just before the Berlin Olympics, Hitler speaking in Munich, addressing a Nazi gathering of students, and he suddenly talks about the British and he starts praising the British, and he says, you know what? When the British went to India, the Indians didn't even know how to walk. The British taught the Indians how to walk. So this is the extent to which he has hatred and contempt for India. And when he makes that statement, there are very angry reactions in India in 1936. With Netaji is protesting, Netaji is in Europe at this point in time in 36. That is before he returns from Europe. There are angry editorials written in Indian newspapers saying, how can he write this about Indians? What does he think of himself? And right through in 1938, 39, right through the 40s, when he's having even dinner table conversations, his interpreters were recording what he was saying to his close military colleagues, even during the war, in his bunker or at his military headquarters. And even there, time and again, he keeps referring to the Indians. He talks referring to how dirty they are. He talks referring to the Ganga. He calls them cripples and all of that. So there are plenty of surprises here, especially for the younger generation.
There's a reason this thing is brought up so that they understand and they read more than restricting themselves and reading half of the Minecraft.
Yeah.
It's better to read this entire book and understand and fill the gap as you rightly said. Let me come to two of the aspects when it comes to the Indian political leaders. Mahatma Gandhi was quite dominant leader.
Yeah.
His ideology and philosophy was quite different to that of Hitler.
Yeah.
Hitler too was a dominant leader, we cannot deny that fact. What exactly was transacted? Because Mahatma Gandhi has written a letter to Hitler just on the brink of that Second World War. But he had a very special dislike for Mahatma Gandhi. What is that?
Hitler's statement of 1934, 1924 rather, is what has happened is, I'll give you an idea of the situation in Germany. The French have suddenly intruded into a part of Germany because Germany is very weak at this point in time. And they suddenly come in, claiming a part of Germany. And the Weimar Republic, at that point in time, which is ruling Germany, which is Germany's democratic experiment after the First World War, they say, let us fight the French with non-violent by offering non-violent resistance. And Hitler gets very angry at that point in time. And Hitler says that these Gandhian methods I don't want in Germany because this will not help at all. He's saying that the admiration of Gandhi, in my opinion, is a racial perversity. But that is another matter. That is a matter of responding to military aggression with non-violence, which is itself a complex subject. But interestingly, closer to the war, there's a chapter in my book on that. Lord Halifax goes to meet Hitler in Germany in order to prevent the Second World War because war clouds on the horizon. Germany is getting very, very aggressive. They've already got into Austria, they are threatening Czechoslovakia, and all of that is happening. So Lord Halifax goes there, and Hitler, right in the middle of that conversation, starts giving him unsolicited suggestions about what the British should do in India and how they should deal with the Indian freedom struggle. He says, what are you doing in India? There's a very easy way of sorting out the Indian problem because the British are really having a problem in India now. The freedom struggle has reached a certain point where it has gained plenty of momentum. In 1937, the elections have happened. So Indians in significant numbers have entered the provincial assemblies. The Congress has won a majority of seats in so many 7 or 8 provinces at that point in time. And he says, what are you doing there? There's a very simple way of sorting out the Indian problem. Shoot Gandhi. Then he says, if that doesn't work, shoot other prominent Congress leaders. If that doesn't work, shoot another 100 people and it will get sorted out. And Lord Halifax is completely taken aback because look at the interesting thing here. Hitler has never visited India. He does not know of the Indian situation firsthand. He has second-hand information because he's in Germany. He's distant. Halifax has been to India. He was previously known as Lord Irwin, with whom Gandhi signed in 1931 the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, which in itself was a controversial pact. And he spent several years in India as Lord Irwin, and he has a much better understanding of things on Indian soil than Hitler does. Of course, he's a fox himself. He's very famously known as the Holy Fox. But Hitler is giving him suggestions on how to deal with the Indian situation, and the first thing he says is shoot Mahatma Gandhi. And then Gandhi writes 2 letters to him at the outbreak of the Second World War, to which Gandhi gets no response at all. But the more interesting thing I would say is that when Hitler starts making things very difficult for Jews in Germany, in 1938, and there is Kristallnacht, where thousands of German shops are destroyed. There's so much glass on the streets of Berlin and Munich and other places that the whole night is known as the Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. And so many people are beaten up, killed. A number of atrocities are taking place against Jews in Germany in 1938. Austria is attacked, then Czechoslovakia is attacked, and then Gandhi writes all of a sudden in his journal that Jews are making a mistake. They should be dealing with Hitler with non-violence. They should have a non-violent approach towards Hitler. I'm sure Hitler will respond to their non-violence. And the entire Jewish world is very upset. And there is tremendous criticism of Mahatma Gandhi by leading Jewish scholars like Martin Buber and other Jewish scholars who say to Mahatma Gandhi in their writings that do you even know what you're talking about? Do you know that Hitler doesn't care at all? Do you know what he does if you offer non-violence to him? He just kills people. It's not like the British in India that they do a lathi charge, throw you into prison, and you will still survive. Hitler just knocks you down and kills you. So there is tremendous criticism of Mahatma Gandhi that happens, and then Mahatma Gandhi responds. I have written in my book in a very unfortunate manner because he tries to defend himself, and he gets into further trouble because Gandhi says, "Oh, the Jewish people have also not been very innocent. You don't have true non-violence in your hearts. You also mean harm to Hitler. So you are not pure." And they get even more angry. They say, Mahatma Ji, do you know what you're talking about? So there are these very interesting exchanges that have happened in those years, which we are totally unaware of. This whole interaction between Mahatma Gandhi and the Jewish scholars, where actually Mahatma Gandhi is being criticized for being too soft on Hitler, is an interesting example of what was going on at that point in time.
Probably somebody addressed Hitler as a friend as well.
So Mahatma Gandhi addressed everybody as a friend. And he even in fact said that I don't think Hitler is as bad as he's made out to be in one of his letters to the British. And during the Second World War, he writes to the British also that you must give up your seas, you must give up your homes, but offer non-violent resistance to the Nazis. And again he's criticized. Because the British say, what is this? What is this non-violence thing that you're talking about? Do you know what Hitler is all
about? Two more questions. First is definitely related to Berlin Olympics, because it is stated in one of your interviews from where I'm directly taking this particular question, where it is said that an urban legend, which is pre-WhatsApp era kind of thing, that when India beat Germany in 1936 Hockey Olympic final, so he offered him citizenship. On one hand, he's having so much of hatred for the people in the ground. He's allowing them in Berlin Olympics, holding their entire program. At the same time, be it Major Dhyanchand or be it J.C. Owens, somewhere, I don't know how far this is true, because this has come as a sort of legend over the years. So what is that?
We all know the 1936 Olympics were held in Berlin. Hitler never wanted to host the Olympics there. He didn't want Jews, the Slavic people, black people, and brown people like the Indians to set foot in Germany. That is why he did not want to host the 1936 Olympics. But what had happened was, Weimar Germany, the Weimar Republic, that is the previous government, had committed to hosting the Olympics. And at the last moment, it was difficult to cancel. Hitler still wanted to cancel, but he was persuaded by a section of the Nazi leadership that we must go ahead and host the Olympics. And because Nazi Germany is facing a lot of criticism from the outside world for its dictatorship within Germany and for harassing Jews and other people, let us use the Olympics as a propaganda vehicle. That is how he agrees to host the Olympics. Hitler is finally convinced and he says, okay, let's host it. And then, like we know that all the anti-Jewish posters are removed from the streets of Berlin and Munich in order to project a very clean image of Nazi Germany. And everybody comes in. And then we know how Jesse Owens makes the Olympics his own, in a sense. The other people who made the Olympics their own were the Indian hockey team, led by Dhyan Chand. And not only was the team undefeated in the 1926 Olympics, the Indian hockey team lost only one goal throughout the tournament, and that was in the final to Germany. And even that final, India won 8-1. India scored 8 goals, Germany scored 1.
Well, India was trailing initially by 1 goal and later on they came
Correct,
back.
and they scored 8 goals straight away, because Dhyan Chand and the others were masters, and Dhyan Chand scored 11 goals in that whole tournament, and his brother Roopchand scored another 11 goals. 22 goals were scored by the two brothers themselves. And like we know, Dhyan Chand fought, played, well, fought is also a right word, barefooted in that final, in a part of the final. So, this is how the hosting of the Olympics takes place. Now, we have been hearing these stories are all over the place. Even news channels have carried these stories. You see on YouTube and other places that Hitler offered German citizenship to Dhyan Chand and wanted him to be a part of the German army, offered him a position in the German army. That is a complete lie. It's a myth. It is a myth that has been propagated in recent years, and it has taken on momentum because of YouTube and WhatsApp and all of that. I have been through the documents of that period. I have been through Dhyan Chand's autobiography and other works. Unfortunately, some historians have mentioned that myth as well. But even the manner in which they have mentioned it is very dubious, because they have said it is said that he offered. Said means nothing. One historian has said that it is alleged that Hitler offered citizenship to Dhyan Chand. Alleged is actually a very damning statement. Interestingly, Dhyan Chand writes about the Olympics in detail in his autobiography. And he talks about how they saw Hitler from a distance, the Indian hockey team, and they saw Hermann Goring, and they were admiring all the medals that Hermann Goring was wearing, and they saw him from a distance, they say. Can you imagine if Dhyan Chand had really been offered citizenship by Hitler or a position in the German army by Hitler, or even if he had met Hitler, he would not have mentioned it in his autobiography, or the newspapers of the time, Indian newspapers of the time, would not have made any record of that fact. This whole phobia about the Nazis actually started in the 1970s onwards. That is when people really stopped identifying themselves, and the whole horror became much clearer to the world than it was earlier. And Hitler had of course died in 1945, and Dhyan Chand was talking about his autobiography in the 1950s, when Hitler was not so much of an untouchable in the sense that of course he was a villain. But people did say that I met him, and if he said we saw Goring from a distance, he would certainly have said that we met Hitler, we shook hands. And we speak about on YouTube about how we shook hands with Hitler, with Dhyan Chand shook hands with Hitler, and Hitler offered him a position. It's a lie. It's a lie propagated, unfortunately, also by many people who have been close to Dhyan Chand. Many people, meaning not those who played with him. Even the other players never mentioned anything of this sort, but subsequent generations. It's quite unfortunate, but it's a lie. It's a myth. So do not believe it when anybody says that Hitler offered a position to Dhyan Chand and he praised it. No, not at all. Certainly not.
Is it something like people are trying to switch his role from being a villain to an anti-hero?
Yes, it's part of an attempt. But like I said, in 1936, just before the Olympics begins, he speaks to Nazi students and Munich and says the Indians don't even know how to walk. It's because of the British that they are walking. And then can you imagine 6 months down the line, they is suddenly praising these Indians as champions, hockey champions, and offering them positions in the Third Reich. And there is no record of it anywhere. There is no shred of evidence to establish that Dhyanchand was praised by Hitler or offered a position in the Third Reich.
I had kept one particular question, quite a delicate one. It is related to Hitler and Netaji Bose. This particular question is the last question for my, because I personally feel that there is no doubt on the patriotism of Netaji. Netaji had always been against whatsoever he had said, any derogatory statement he had made against India and Indians and struggle. Hitler never stood for the cause as well as the case when it comes to the India's liberation struggle. But even when that iconic picture you were talking about, there also you mentioned that Netaji had conveyed his feelings and he conveyed that these things should be removed from your biography.
Right.
But Netaji ultimately decided to join hands with him for the Indian freedom struggle. Two things. How far was he successful to get support from Hitler? And secondly, was there a misjudgment as far as Netaji is concerned, relying on making Hitler an ally?
Now, Netaji has a very complex relationship with the Third Reich. When Hitler comes to power, and you will find in my book several instances of Indians studying and living in Germany who are thrown into prison by the Nazis, assaulted, tortured, brutalized, and at least in a couple of cases expelled, thrown out of Nazi Germany in 1933 itself. The journalist A.C.N. Nambiar, Rabindranath Tagore's grandnephew, Saumendranath Tagore, he was arrested on the borders of Germany on the charge that he was part of a conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Sarojini Naidu's son, Jayasurya Naidu, who was studying at Berlin University at that point in time, is picked up from his lodgings in Berlin and thrown into prison by the Nazis. It's all there in my book. He's assaulted. These people are kept in Nazi prisons without any charge. And it is only when some well-meaning Britishers like Josiah Wedgwood, who's a British parliamentarian, who's a liberal, who has good thoughts about the Indian people and wants them to gain their freedom gradually. He makes a lot of noise in the British Parliament, and it's only then that these things come to light. That even the British government starts making inquiries about Indians who are imprisoned in Germany. So when these atrocities against Indians start in Nazi Germany, and we are all totally unaware of this chapter of Indian history that so many Indians were assaulted and attacked and imprisoned by the Nazis. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose is among the first people to strongly criticize the Hitler regime and to ferociously attack the Hitler regime for its unjust treatment of Indians. Netaji goes to Europe in 1933 to recuperate because he's not well, and he makes several statements against the Nazis and their treatment of Indians. In 1934, more and more atrocities take place, and a number of organizations of Indian students start getting concerned about the state of Indian students. And Netaji is the one who actually drafts the statements for these organizations, condemning the Hitler government, condemning the Nazi regime. When in 1936, Hitler makes the statements about Indians not knowing how to walk, Netaji is about to leave Germany and return to India, leave Europe and Germany and return to India, and he says that I'm extremely disappointed with Nazi Germany because I'm not even in a mood to talk. Because is this how they think of Indians? And in fact, he makes the statement that many others can lick the boots of the Nazis, of the British, but and the Nazis, but I will not do that. We will not do that. Indians will not do that. What happens in the year 1938-39 is we all know that Bose becomes president of the Indian National Congress, and because of the shenanigans within the Indian National Congress, he is denied a second term as the Congress president. And Gandhi unfortunately starts sidelining him, and he's sidelined to an extent where firstly he's alienated by the established Congress elite, and secondly, as the war begins, Netaji starts believing that the negative energies of Nazi Germany, he is firmly convinced that the energies are negative, they are not positive. But he believes that German military power and these negative energies can be converted into positive energies for the sake of putting pressure on the British so that India could push for independence. So what has happened to Netaji is he's obsessed with the idea of Indian independence. He cannot think of any other thing, and he believes that this is the right moment to strike. And it's a classic case of an enemy's enemy being our friend. That let us go and seek their help. But when he goes to Nazi Germany, we know what circumstances he goes to Germany. It's the stuff of legend. We all know that. But even there, he has a very difficult time. But he does not compromise even there. The moment he goes there, he says, from 1933 onwards, he has been telling Hitler, please delete those remarks from Mein Kampf. When in 1933 Hitler comes to power and Netaji goes to Europe, the first thing he says is, I want to meet Hitler and I want to ask him to delete all the anti-India remarks he has made in Mein Kampf. And he keeps making this demand right through that decade. And even when he is in Germany, he keeps seeking a meeting with Hitler. He keeps making that demand. He makes that demand even during the meeting with Hitler, like you said. Very interestingly, Hitler was not very keen to meet him. He finally agreed to meet him only because Mussolini put some pressure on him. And in fact, the Nazis had a difficult time with Bose because Netaji would not do what they wanted him to do. The Nazis wanted Netaji purely for propaganda purposes, and he had put certain conditions. He said, you first issue a declaration in favor of Indian independence. And the Nazis say no, not right now. Hitler will not agree. They asked Hitler, Hitler said no, not right now. I don't want to issue a declaration in favor of Indian freedom. So let's keep that in mind. Even in the war, he's saying, I don't want to issue that declaration. Bose gets frustrated and Bose gets upset. He also protests to the Nazis. And the Nazis are finding him so uncomfortable that at one point they actually contemplate sending him across the border to Switzerland because they are having a difficult time with him. They are not doing propaganda. He's not doing exactly what the Nazis want him to do. He says, first you issue this declaration, then I will cooperate. So he is committed to India, and it's a revelation of his sense of integrity that even in the meeting with Hitler, one of the key demands he makes is delete your anti-India remarks made in Mein Kampf.
In fact, this is a very interesting, as we are discussing further, it's getting interesting. We have time constraints. I'm sure that the kind of curiosity with which I came, I'm sure that lots of things are answered, but now I'm equally curious to go through the entire book so I can get the entire details. Before I wind up and I give it to him, there are two small questions. One is, what next? What are you planning to come out with now?
Well, something related to political history.
Okay.
So I'm working on
So
that.
we'll definitely look forward for. And we wish you all the luck for success of this book. I'm sure it's already getting stand and reaching out to people. And very soon you'll be having many more buyers here as well. As we all are having some more curiosity, and I'm sure that it cannot be done in this 1 hour talk. So definitely we'll try to see that how best we can get from this book.
Thank you, Tushar. Thank you so much. Thanks.
At the outset, I'd like to thank Mr. Vaibhav Purandre sir and Mr. Tushar Pule sir for being here with us today. We wish to get to hear you both again and be equally enlightened as we are today. And for my dear massive audience, I'm sure after witnessing this conversation, you all are taking home and enriched versions of yourselves. Just as I will. Thank you for joining with us today. Until I see you again, this is Amar Jagre signing off.
Welcome to Rai Soni Group, a vision beyond.